Hey there, welcome to the Convict Diaries. This is an AI voice and I need to apologize for any mistakes it makes.
Today I thought that we could look at Breaker Morant. He was an English horseman, bush ballad writer, military officer, and war criminal who was convicted and executed for murdering 9 prisoners of war and 3 captured civilians in 3 separate incidents during the Second Boer War. Edwin Henry Murrant, later known as Harry Harbord Morant, was born in Bridgewater, Somerset, England, on the 9th of December, 1864. His father died before his birth, leaving his mother, Catherine, née Riley, in financial difficulty. Catherine secured his education at the Royal Masonic Institution for Boys, where he was academically gifted but often disruptive. She worked as a workhouse matron for 21 years, retiring in 1882 and dying in 1899. Seeking colonial experience, Morant arrived in Townsville, Queensland, on the 5th of June, 1883. He worked in a travelling rodeo and then as a stockman, briefly marrying May Dwyer, later Daisy Bates, in a marriage that quickly failed due to his financial dishonesty. Shortly after, he faced theft and fraud charges but was acquitted of some. He then adopted the name Harry Harbord Morant, fabricating claims of noble English ancestry, including falsely stating he was Admiral Sir George Digby Morant's son. While some suggest the Admiral funded his education, this remains unproven. For the next 15 years, Morant roamed through Queensland, New South Wales, and South Australia, working as a horsebreaker, drover, and bush poet. He developed a reputation for heavy drinking, womanizing, and cruelty to animals, inciting fights with Aboriginal stockmen. He also published bush ballads in the Bulletin under various pseudonyms and befriended poets like Banjo Patterson and Will Ogilvie. His skilled horsemanship gained him recognition, notably for riding Darjan's Grey at the 1897 Hawkesbury Show. By the late 1890s, Morant's circumstances declined, often fleeing towns to escape debts. A handsome and roguish figure with expensive tastes, he rarely let a lack of money deter him. In early 1900, he enlisted for service in the Second Boer War. On the 13th of January, 1900, Morant joined the South Australian Mounted Rifles under the alias Henry Holland Morant. After training, he sailed to South Africa and served in various roles, including horse handler and dispatch rider, eventually working for the Daily Telegraph's war correspondent, Bennett Burleigh. His bravery and riding skills earned him praise as he closely followed British forces during their advance through the Transvaal. By late September 1900, convinced the war was nearly over, Morant planned to return to England with war correspondent Bennett Burleigh. Hoping to keep his options open for a return to South Africa, he sought a position in Major General Robert Baden-Powell's new police force, the South African Constabulary. To help secure this, he befriended Lieutenant Percy Hunt, a fellow horse enthusiast and officer with strong social ties, who gave Morant contacts in London. Morant's unit, the South Australian Mounted Rifles, returned home in October. His commanding officer wrote him a positive farewell letter, praising his conduct and alertness. Morant and Burleigh stayed in luxury at Cape Town's Mount Nelson Hotel, where Morant promised the bill would be paid by Admiral Morant, whom he falsely claimed as his father. They sailed for London in late October, arriving in November. In London, Morant falsely told South Australia's Agent General, Sir John Cockburn, that he was now a lieutenant in the SAC and on leave. These lies were reported in the Adelaide Observer soon after. Meanwhile, the Mount Nelson Hotel sent a letter in January 1901 to Admiral Morant, seeking payment. The Admiral's relatives replied, denying any connection to Harry Morant and refusing the debt. In February 1901, Morant took part in Queen Victoria's funeral procession, wearing a sack lieutenant's uniform despite holding no official rank. An Australian journalist noted his presence and repeated his false claims in the press. Morant's visit to England was largely unsuccessful. He stayed with his estranged sister Annie, found little welcome in society, and was reminded of his lack of prospects. With no commission and no future in England or Australia, due to debts and his criminal history, he returned to South Africa in March 1901, hoping for better luck. After suffering defeats in open combat during 1899–1900, the Bitrinders, Boer fighters refusing to surrender, shifted to guerrilla warfare. In response, British Commander Lord Kitchener adopted harsh counterinsurgency tactics, including the destruction of Boer farms and the internment of civilians in concentration camps. Families of guerrilla fighters had their rations cut. Boer commandos, cut off from supply lines, began raiding trains for food and ammunition. To combat sabotage in the northern Transvaal, loyalist Boers were recruited into a new irregular unit, the Bushveld Carbineers, BVC, originally called the Bushveld Mounted Rifles. Recruitment fell short, so the BVC also accepted colonial volunteers still in South Africa. By late March 1901, 320 men formed the regiment under Major Robert Lenihan, joining Brigadier General Herbert Plumer's column moving north toward Pietersburg. Morant, newly returned to South Africa and falsely claiming a previous commission in the South African Constabulary, approached Lenihan. Despite doubts, Lenihan granted him a commission as a lieutenant in the BVC on 1 April 1901. Morant joined the advance northward, where the BVC handled tasks like responding to Boer sabotage on railways. They began using Boer prisoners to ride in train cars ahead of the engine as a human shield. After this tactic proved effective, captured Boers became more cooperative. Following the capture of Pietersburg, the BVC established headquarters there under Colonel Francis Hall. Captain Alfred Taylor, nicknamed Bilala, Killer, by locals for his brutality, was appointed intelligence chief. The BVC operated in the vast Zoutpansberg district. On 4 May, Morant led 22 men from No. 1 Troop to Strijdpoort Pass, southwest of Pietersburg, where he quickly captured 5 Boers without casualties. He developed a strong working relationship with his second-in-command, Sergeant Frank Eland. The troop conducted daily patrols and provided escorts between Pietersburg and nearby passes. A concentration camp was established near Pietersburg on the 11th of May, soon holding up to 4,000 prisoners. Conditions were deadly. Within weeks, 88 women, 523 children, and 46 men died. On the 22nd of May, the BVC relocated their camp a short distance away, with Eland organizing defenses and Morant escorting prisoners back to the camp. In June, Morant made several trips between Strijdpoort and Pietersburg. His friend Lieutenant Percy Hunt, now out of civil administration work, secured a captaincy in the BVC through his Pretoria connections and joined Morant in early July. On 4 July, a train near Potgietersrus was ambushed by Boers. 10 men from the Gordon Highlanders, including Morant's friend Lieutenant Alexander Best, were killed. Morant was deeply affected, and Eland later wrote that Morant would not have taken prisoners had they encountered the attackers that night. Shortly after, Morant joined a night patrol accused of aggressively searching a house under British protection. The patrol leader, Lieutenant Edwards, was briefly arrested, and Morant returned from the mission visibly shaken. He later claimed to Eland that Best and his men had been executed in cold blood. The Sweetwater's killings and the rise of Fort Edward, June–July 1901. In early June 1901, Captain James Robertson led a squadron of the Bushveld Carbineers, BVC, accompanied by 60 men and intelligence officer Captain Alfred Taylor, to establish a base at Sweetwater's Farm, about 130 kilometers north of Pietersburg in the active Spelonkin region. Among them was Veterinary Lieutenant Peter Hancock. Local Boer leaders, including Tom Kelly and Ben Viljoen, soon resumed guerrilla activity in response to the British presence. Taylor, known for his ruthlessness, formed a network of local Boer informants. A squadron's role was to act on the intelligence he gathered. However, Robertson proved an ineffective leader, lacking authority and distrusting his own men. Not long after arriving, Taylor shot a local African man in the head for not providing information. On the 2nd of July, Taylor received word that 6 Boers in wagons were approaching to surrender. He, Hancock, and Robertson conferred, and Robertson, citing Taylor's supposed authority, ordered Sergeant Major Kenneth Morrison to send a patrol to intercept and kill the Boers. Though hesitant, Sergeant Dudley Oldham eventually complied. The patrol found the Boers, who included a child and an elderly man, flying white flags and offering no resistance. All were disarmed and shot by the roadside. Taylor, Hancock, and Robertson arrived later to inspect the bodies, and local Africans were ordered to bury them. When Taylor questioned the grave diggers and received unsatisfactory answers, they fled. He sent a patrol to track and kill them, which was done. The oxen captured with the Boers were later sent to Taylor's personal farm in Rhodesia, with Morrison's help. One of the patrol members, Boer-born Baron Vanben, was disturbed by the killings and confided in relatives of the victims held at the camp. Word spread, and Hancock confronted him. The next day, under Taylor and Robertson's orders, Hancock took Vanben on patrol and, when isolated in the bush, shot him. Hancock filed a false report of the death, which Robertson edited before sending it up the chain. The body was never recovered, and some BVC members believed Vanben was murdered. Hancock threatened to shoot anyone who contradicted his story. By early July, reports of misconduct in the Spelonkin, murders, poor discipline, and lawlessness, reached Colonel Hall in Pietersburg. One report even accused Robertson of sexually assaulting a Boer woman. On the 11th of July, Hall dispatched Captain Percy Hunt, along with Lieutenants Harry Morant and Charles Hannam and 60 BVC men, to relieve Robertson and take over the post. A new base, Fort Edward, was established nearby. Hunt assumed command on the 13th of July. Most of his squadron returned to Pietersburg, though Hancock remained under Taylor's recommendation. Rumors of serious misconduct surrounded his squadron, prompting fears of court-martial. Before departing Pietersburg, Hunt claimed to have spoken with Kitchener's secretary, who allegedly said no Boer prisoners were to be taken. Hunt relayed this to his men, but prisoners were still taken after his arrival, until his death. Fort Edward, July–August 1901. As Fort Edward was being fortified with barbed wire and trenches, patrolling began. On the 16th of July, Lieutenant Hannam led a 15-man patrol toward the Letaba River to address unrest among local African communities. 2 days later, a parade marked the fort's official christening attended by Reverend Fritz Reuter of the nearby Mendingen Mission. Reuter, friendly with the BVC, informed Captain Hunt that Boer leader Ben Viljoen was operating from Duivelskloot and intimidating pro-British locals, including Eland's mother at their farm Ravenshill. Hunt sent an escort with Reuter and ordered reconnaissance in the area. On the 19th of July, a patrol under Lieutenant Picton left to meet a supply convoy. Along the way, several jars of rum were stolen. More arrests followed upon return to the fort, including Sergeant Major Morrison, who fled on the 24th of July. A patrol led by Sergeant Grey caught up with him, but instead of returning him, they joined him in drinking the stolen rum. All were later dismissed from the BVC after interrogation in Pietersburg. Despite this, drinking remained rampant at Fort Edward. On the 27th of July, Hunt and Hancock left for the Ellerton gold mine, escorted by Eland and another sergeant. They overnighted at Fonseca's store but failed to meet a planned contact. At the mine, caretaker George Anderson warned them about hostile Lobedu and nearby Boer activity. Eland, disguised as a civilian, conducted a successful liaison with the Lobedu, visited his family farm, and gathered intelligence. He returned to Fort Edward on the 30th of July, escorted by Hannam's patrol, which also brought in 3 Boer prisoners. On the 31st of July, Morant returned from patrol with 18 Boer prisoners, 15 wagons, rifles, and livestock. Hunt, however, was displeased, concerned about dwindling rations and manpower needed to guard prisoners. Soon after, intelligence revealed another group of 18 Boers nearby, prompting another patrol. On the 1st of August, Picton's patrol captured 2 Boers, then ambushed and seized more wagons, rifles, and additional Boer families. They later caught a group led by a local farmer, Klopper, bringing their total haul to 27 Boer prisoners and numerous civilians. Burdened by their spoils, they began a slow 3-day return to the fort on the 5th of August. Meanwhile, on the 3rd of August, Lieutenant Whitten arrived from Pietersburg with 20 reinforcements, including Sergeant Major Hammett, replacing Morrison. They were met by Hannam and welcomed by Morant and Hancock. Hunt had just departed with 17 men. During this time, Morant and Hancock showed both cruelty, shooting at a monkey they had tied up, and surprising kindness, particularly towards Boer children awaiting transfer to the Pietersburg concentration camp. The death of Captain Hunt, August 1901. Following reports from Trooper James Christie that a Boer laager had been found supplying Viljoen's larger force in the Modjadji Mountains, Captain Hunt assembled 15 Bushveld carbines and left Fort Edward on the 3rd of August. Morant was left in command, and Hunt took Sergeant Frank Eland with him, despite Morant's objections. They planned to rendezvous with Christie at Buffelsburg and attack the laager at night. On the way, African informants reported that Viljoen himself was nearby at a farmhouse in Duivelskloot. Prioritizing the chance to capture or kill Viljoen, Hunt diverted to attack the farmhouse instead. He instructed Eland to gather friendly African tribesmen for support and reached the Mendingen Mission late on the 5th of August. Reverend Reuter warned Hunt against attacking the farmhouse, which lay in a rocky gully with only 2 exits and nearby Boer reinforcements within riding distance. Hunt, however, pressed on. Early on the 6th of August, Hunt's force dismounted a kilometre from the Viljoen farmhouse. The plan was to surround the building and demand surrender. If refused, tribesmen would charge. Unknown to Hunt, Viljoen's men had seen the patrol coming and were lying in wait. As Hunt approached with Eland, calling for surrender, the Boers opened fire. A chaotic firefight followed. Hunt was fatally shot in the chest while charging the house. Eland was also mortally wounded. The tribesmen, ordered to attack, instead fled. The patrol was forced to retreat, leaving behind their dead. Boers Berend and Johannes Viljoen and another man were also killed. Survivors returned to the mission with confused accounts. Reuter reportedly chastised them for abandoning their officers. Hunt's body was later found mutilated, though the cause of the injuries was disputed. Some blamed the Boers, others claimed traditional Lobedu practices explained the disfigurement, said to release the spirits of the dead. Captain Percy Hunt was buried at the Mettingen mission, where a cross now marks his grave. Sergeant Frank Eland was buried at his family farm, Ravenshill. Aftermath of Captain Hunt's death and the execution of Floris Viscera. When news of Captain Percy Hunt's death reached Fort Edward, Lieutenant Harry Morant reportedly broke down in tears before ordering immediate patrols. Captain Taylor then commanded the troops to avenge Hunt, allegedly telling them to give no quarter. Morant never saw Hunt's body himself, arriving only after the burial, but was convinced by accounts that Hunt had been murdered, not killed in combat. According to Trooper Witten, Morant vowed from then on to take no prisoners, despite having previously disobeyed similar orders from Hunt. On the 9th of August, 1901, Morant led a patrol back toward the Viljoen farmhouse, now abandoned, and pursued the retreating Letterbar commando with the help of Lobedu tribesmen. That evening, they discovered the Boer encampment but failed to capture them due to premature firing. One young Boer, 20-year-old Floris Viscera, who was wounded and unable to flee, was found hiding under a wagon. Morant interrogated Viscera through an interpreter, promising to spare his life in exchange for honest answers. Viscera cooperated, revealing Boer plans and confirming Hunt had been killed in battle. Despite this, he was kept in custody and transported in a cart for about 15 miles. Trooper Edward Powell later claimed that Viscera was tried by a makeshift court-martial, though he was never present for it, and the outcome was predetermined. According to multiple accounts, Viscera was shot the next day. Witnesses reported he was lifted from the cart in a blanket, seated on the ground, and executed by a firing squad of BVC troopers under orders from Morant. A coup de grace was delivered by Lieutenant Harry Picton. Viscera had allegedly reminded Morant of his promise of clemency, only to be told, "It is idle talk. We are going to shoot you." Trooper James Christie objected, but Morant insisted, blaming Boer brutality toward Hunt. Following the execution, Christie tore off his BVC badge in protest and denounced the act. Viscera was buried in a shallow grave near Koedo's River. Ironically, despite betraying his comrades, Viscera was later added to the Soutpansberg Commando's Roll of Honour. On the way back, Morant's unit stopped at the shop of a British trader, Mr. Hayes, who was later looted by Boers. Upon returning to Fort Edward, they found the fort had recently withstood a Boer attack thanks to reinforcements. The killing of Viscera had broader consequences. BVC trooper R.M. Cochrane later wrote that the execution caused local African allies to stop cooperating. One tribesman, when ordered by Taylor to give up a wounded Boer, refused and was reportedly shot dead on the spot. Other similar killings followed, further escalating tensions. On the 20th of August, 1901, 8 surrendered Boer prisoners were reported to Captain Taylor by his agent. Sergeant Wrench and a patrol were dispatched to collect them, but Corporal van der Westhuizen reminded Wrench of Morant's order against taking more prisoners due to rationing. Lieutenants Morant, Hancock, and Whitten intercepted Wrench's patrol near Elim Hospital, ordering them ahead as an advance guard with a suspicious instruction to return if shots were heard. Reverend Heese, a missionary, encountered the troopers and recognized a friend among the prisoners, Dutch school teachers who had surrendered. He spoke to them, assuring them of their safety, which angered the guards who briefly considered him a prisoner. Heese's wife later recounted the encounter in a letter, noting the prisoners' unease about their fate despite surrendering. Trooper van der Westhuizen recalled hearing prearranged signal shots followed by a volley, indicating the prisoners were being killed. Sergeant Wrench falsely denied hearing shots to Captain Taylor. The 8 victims included C.P.J. Smith and W.D. Major. Lieutenant Whitten claimed one prisoner attacked him before being shot. Van der Westhuizen believed one victim, Smith, was included due to a debt owed by an associate of Ladeboer. Despite BVC claims, only 5 of the victims were on the Zoutpansberg Commando's Roll of Honor. About a week later, Reverend Heese was found shot dead en route to report Morant's actions. Captain de Bertadano, suspicious of the explanation, launched an investigation hampered by communication issues with Fort Edward. His scouts later reported that Hancock, under Morant's orders, killed Heese. Missionary Krauser also investigated, finding Heese's grave. Historians suggest Heese's murder was pivotal in bringing the other BVC killings to trial. Subsequently, Morant's unit intercepted and shot 3 surrender corps commandos. Later, Morant convinced Major Lenehan to authorize a patrol to capture Field Cornet Kelly, an Irish Corps commando. Morant's patrol successfully captured Kelly and his men, earning Morant a commendation and leave. On 4 October, 1901, 15 Bushveld Carbinus, BVC, secretly sent a letter to Colonel F. H. Hall, detailing 6 disgraceful incidents at Fort Edward. 1 Valdezia killings, July 2, 6 surrendered Afrikaner men and boys were shot, and their money and livestock stolen. Captains Taylor and Robertson allegedly ordered the killings, relayed by Sergeant Major Morrison to Sergeant Oldham, who, with other troopers, carried them out. 2 Vanben's death, July 4, BVC Lieutenant Hancock shot Trooper B.J. Vanben, an Afrikaner who disapproved of the Valdezia killings and informed the victims' families. 3 Viscera's revenge killing, the 11th of August wounded POW Floris Viscera was interrogated, transported 15 miles, and then shot by a firing squad under Lieutenant Morant, with a coup de grace by Lieutenant Picton. This was allegedly revenge for Captain Hunt's death. 4 Elim Hospital Massacre, the 23rd of August Captain Taylor and Lieutenant Morant ordered the shooting of 4 surrendered Afrikaners and 4 Dutch school teachers. Lieutenant Whitten and others formed the firing squad. 3 native South African witnesses were also killed. 5 Heese's assassination, the 23rd of August Reverend Carl August Daniel Heese, who administered to the Elim victims and protested their deaths, was ambushed and killed by Lieutenant Hancock. Heese's driver was also killed. 6 Wagon train attack, September 5 Lieutenant Hannum ordered the shooting at a wagon train of surrendering Afrikaner women and children, resulting in the deaths of 2 boys and the wounding of a girl. 7 Van Staden family murders, September 7 Roelf Van Staden and his 2 sons, coming to surrender for medical treatment, were met by Morant, Hancock, and others and shot after allegedly being forced to dig their own graves. The letter accused Major Robert Lenehan of being aware of these crimes and requested a full inquiry by imperial officers to ensure justice, asking for witnesses to be kept in Pietersburg. The signatories, including Australians and Afrikaners, stated they could not return home with the stigma of these crimes and noted the difficulty in re-enlisting due to the unit's reputation. In response to Trooper Cochrane's letter, Colonel Hall summoned Fort Edward officers to Pietersburg on 21 October, 1901. On 23 October, they were escorted into town like criminals and Morant was arrested upon his return from leave. Captain de Bertadano recounted a confrontational encounter with Morant, who protested his trial for Heese's murder. De Bertadano asserted Morant's guilt in Heese's death, linking it to the fear of Heese reporting the Boer killings. A court of inquiry convened on 6 November, 1901, for 4 weeks, followed by 2 weeks of deliberation. The indictments included 1 Captains Robertson and Taylor, and Sergeant Major Morrison for the murder of 6 Boers. 2 Lieutenant Hancock for the murder of Trooper Vanben, and Major Lenihan for neglect of duty. 3 Lieutenants Morant, Hancock, Whitten, and Picton for the murder of Floris Viscera. 4 Lieutenants Morant, Hancock, and Whitten for the murder of 8 Boers. 5 Lieutenants Morant and Hancock for the murder of Reverend Heese. 6 No charges were filed for the deaths of the 3 children. 7 Lieutenants Morant and Hancock for the murder of 3 Boers. Colonel St. Clair's confidential report corroborated the Court of Inquiry's views, identifying Morant as the primary instigator and Hancock as the principal executioner. He noted the reign of terror that prevented reporting of illegal acts. The court-martial began on 16 January, 1902. Damning evidence from BVC members was presented. Morant and his co-accused were later transferred to Pretoria and tried for Heese's murder, for which they were acquitted. However, Morant and Hancock were sentenced to death on the other charges and executed 18 hours later. Whitten's sentence was commuted to life imprisonment by Lord Kitchener. Morant's claim of an engagement in England was later proven false. Ex-Captain Robertson personally collected the death warrants from Kitchener, who warned him to consider himself lucky. Major Thomas's appeals to Kitchener and King Edward VII were unsuccessful. Morant and Hancock reportedly refused a clergyman, with Morant declaring himself a pagan. However, prison records indicated their Christian affiliations. The BVC was abolished, and Major Lenihan was sent to Australia. Morant and Hancock spent their last night together, with Morant writing a final verse and a confession implicating themselves in the death of the Boer who killed their friend Hunt. On 27 February, 1902, Whitten was taken away before the execution. Morant and Hancock were executed by firing squad, refusing blindfolds. Morant's last words were a defiant order to the firing squad. The Australian government demanded an explanation from Kitchener, who detailed the charges and convictions, portraying Morant as the originator of the crimes. Trial transcripts were later destroyed. Whitten was imprisoned in England before being released after 28 months and returning to Australia, where he wrote a controversial memoir, Scapegoats of the Empire, which was criticised for its biased portrayal. In 1929, Whitten revealed Hancock had confessed to murdering Heese on Morant's orders. George Whitten died in 1942. Alfred Taylor died in 1941 in southern Rhodesia. Henry Ladeboa, who assisted in revenge killings, became a game ranger. Major Bolton, the Provost Marshal, became a magistrate in Pietersburg and worked to secure compensation for the victims' families. Despite their acquittal for Heese's murder, his widow received compensation. Other victims' families also received payments. The total identified victims numbered at least 36. The executions caused resentment in Australia, leading to a policy change regarding the court-martial of Australian soldiers by the British military in World War I. The graves of Morant and Hancock became a pilgrimage site for Australian tourists and were later refurbished. There will be no this inserted audio clip if you buy the software license key or activation key. Monuments were erected in South Africa to mark the sites of the incidents. During the 2002 Anglo-Boer War centenary, a reenactment of the court-martial included the granddaughter of Reverend Heese presenting items recovered from his cart. The life, actions, trial, and execution of Breaker Morant remain subjects of significant debate, with accounts varying widely due to the loss of the official court-martial records. These records, despite Kitchener's claim of being sent to England, have never resurfaced, and even the Australian government seemingly lacked access. While some researchers were told the records existed but were inaccessible until 2002, others believe they never left South Africa. Arthur Davies' book, Breaker Morant and the Bushveld Carbinus, offers a comprehensive account based on depositions. Charles Leach's 2012 book, The Legend of Breaker Morant is Dead and Buried, utilizes previously unpublished South African sources, portraying Morant's crimes as more severe than initially understood. In the absence of the official records, key primary sources include a Times report from April 1902, George Whitton's memoir Scapegoats of the Empire, and a 1929 letter from Whitton to Major Thomas suggesting Hancock's confession was coerced. A 2004 discovery of Provost Marshal Robert Purr's diary mentions the BVC shooting surrendered Boers and a missionary, interpreted by some as evidence of a no prisoners order, and by others as condemnation of killing prisoners after accepting surrender. Later works, such as Cutlack's Breaker Morant 1962, and Kit Denton's novel The Breaker, 1973, further contributed to the Morant legend, though Denton made factual errors. Kenneth Ross's play and the subsequent Bruce Beresford film Breaker Morant 1980 brought the story to a wider audience. Despite general agreement on Morant's involvement in the deaths of Boer commandos, historical opinion remains divided on the number killed, the individuals responsible, and the existence of orders. Some argue Morant and Hancock were scapegoats for a wider no prisoners policy allegedly initiated by Kitchener. However, it's been pointed out that the Bushveld Carbinus were a British imperial unit, making Morant and Hancock technically British officers. A 2002 book by Nick Blasinski supported the scapegoat theory, citing evidence for a known no prisoners order and flawed court-martial procedures. Arthur Davey noted conflicting testimonies regarding alleged no prisoners orders from Captain Hunt. A 2010 petition to pardon Morant and Hancock was criticised in South Africa by descendants of victims. Hamish Patterson argued that accepting surrender obligated the BVC to ensure the prisoners' safety, and that killing them and a neutral witness were terrible errors of judgment. Australian lawyer Jim Uncles submitted petitions in 2009 to review the convictions, but the British Ministry of Defence rejected the appeal in 2010, citing no new primary evidence. The Australian government also declined to pursue the issue, stating pardons are only appropriate for the morally and technically innocent. In 2016, a collection of Morant's personal effects and a signed flag from Major Thomas, referring to Morant and Hancock as utter scapegoats, were discovered in a rubbish tip in Tenterfield, Australia. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this little tale about the Breaker. Please join me again on the Convict Diaries.